People may have their own image of what it's like growing up Hispanic, but I'm here to show you what it was like for me. It all started when my mother immigrated from Mexico to the United States in 1986. She found work in Texas picking vegetables in the fields. She ended up moving to Los Angeles and soon after met my dad. They met through a mutual friend at a club and fell in love. In 1992, my older sister Kenya was born. Then, on July 18, 1999, I was born in Baldwin Park, California. This same year, my mother officially became a U.S. citizen. My little sister Alexa was born in 2002. Soon after, the strain of raising 3 children on a low income had begun to push my parents apart. They eventually divorced in 2005. My mom became that mom, a single mother who had 2 to 3 jobs in order to provide for her 3 daughters, living paycheck to paycheck. My mom ended up sending my little sister to Mexico to live with my grandparents. My mom then decided to send me with my grandparents to Mexico as well. My trip then became extended, and soon enough, I went to school there in 3rd grade. My mom wanted me to know more about my culture and get to meet more of my family. I loved it and found myself strengthening my Spanish skills. In 2008, a tragic incident occurred within my family. My grandfather was sadly murdered. My little sister Alexa was present during the incident, but thankfully they didn't hurt her. My mom decided that it was time for us to go back home, and we continued on with our lives, continuously remembering my grandfather. My family and I lived in an apartment complex for a long time, and I enjoyed it. I had many friends and even my cousins living next door to me. They're my mom's cousins' kids, but to me, they're cousins because of how close in age we are. I remember spending much of my childhood outdoors and playing until sunset. I'd get in trouble at times, and I'd find my mother knocking at my friend's door trying to look for me. Because if we all remember, cell phones weren't a thing back then. Besides, my Mexican mother simply thought it was best to drag me home by the ear. Why? We'll never know. As soon as I got home from Mexico, I was enrolled in ELD classes, which means English Language Development. Although my first language was Spanish, I spoke English just as well as my classmates. Still, since I had lived in Mexico for a year, they decided I needed a refresher on the basic English language. Since my English skills were still just as good as they used to be, if not better, I was always confused as to why I needed these classes. My family and I had hit a bump on the road because my mother got an eviction notice. It got hard for her to pay rent, and so we ended up moving to another apartment complex across the street. I remember seeing the stress in my mother, and I knew this was something hard for her to handle with the 3 of us. Since my mom was working all the time, I realized that there wasn't much time for fun, and I needed to grow up. I started doing things that normally a mom would do, like wash dishes, clean the house, get the mail, and put gas in the car. It wasn't something a lot of my friends at my age did, but I never complained because I knew my mom needed all the help she could get. But now that I look back, I don't think that me and my sisters would be as close as we are today if we hadn't gone through all that. My mom soon found an amazing opportunity. One of her cousins decided to stop renting a house and move back to Mexico. Soon enough, we were able to move in because the homeowner had known my mom's family for years. It was the biggest blessing my family has to this day. We moved in, and for the first time ever, I had my own room. I was happy because we had more space than ever, and we made it our home. Moving into a new home meant moving to another city, and by this time, I was going to start middle school. Entering 7th grade at a new middle school was hard, because everyone had their own friends by then, and I was the new girl. However, I soon met my best friend Denise, and soon after made many more friends. I had gotten a boyfriend by the end of 8th grade, and soon after high school came. My mother wasn't fond of the idea, but she ended up accepting it, surprisingly. My mom simply wanted us to only see each other at school, meaning that dates weren't necessary. However, we did slip in some dates here and there, with the approval of my mom, of course. My mom would always remind me that boys weren't supposed to be a distraction and to dedicate myself in school, and so I did. I began tutoring my freshman year after school at a program called La Escuelita because my Spanish teacher was looking for volunteers. I would help kids from kindergarten through 8th grade with their homework. I enjoyed it because I felt proud to give back to my Hispanic community. I loved working with little kids and making their lives and their parents' life a little easier. As I continued to take Spanish courses in high school, I then took AP Spanish Language and Composition my junior year because I wanted a challenge and I was highly comfortable with my skills and culture at that point. I met many great friends because we were all from the same background, and that led to the whole class being comfortable with one another. That same year, my AP Spanish teacher encouraged me and several other students to join the Spanish Honor Society, which was a society that was dedicated to completing community service hours in order to receive a cord or a stole at graduation. We also hosted many cultural events for students and their families. The summer before my sophomore year, my mother had suffered a knee injury which had caused her to lose both of her jobs because of how much time she needed off. My mother was completely shattered because she was worried as to how she was going to provide for my sisters and me. Just when things couldn't get any worse, our homeowner decided that he wanted to sell the house. My mother would have wanted to buy it, but we could never afford a home. The homeowner was pressuring my mom to move out soon, but he didn't understand that my mom was still looking for another place that she could afford. Despite our plea for just a little more time, we got another eviction notice. We had to pack everything and put it into storage, and only kept the most indispensable stuff right outside our door, while we hid inside for several days. My mom's friend, however, offered us to move into a single bedroom to rent for the time being, and so we moved. It was a very hard time for my family and I, because the situation was nothing like we've experienced before. We had to learn to adapt to being in a small room with each other all the time. The living conditions were hard to grow accustomed to. Doing homework on my bed all the time, eating on a foldable snack table, eating out most of the time. I hated the fact that my family had come to this point, but as time went by, I started realizing how grateful I was for having a roof over my head, a bed, and food. Most importantly, I learned that even though I wanted my own private space, it only made me appreciate my family even more. However, I couldn't imagine myself living here during my college years. At the same time, I felt guilt for wanting to leave because I felt responsible for my younger sister and my mother. They both heavily relied on me, and thankfully my mom wanted more for me, and she encouraged me to go live at school. UCSB was one of the several schools that had accepted me, and was located not too close and not too far from home. I had accepted their admission, and here I am today.